Right, welcome to our Instagram live Carney's Conversations. Just waiting for Nisha to join us. I think this is the fourth one of our interviews that we've done so far. They've all been pretty good so far. We've had some good guests. And yeah, today's one, I'll introduce her properly when she joins us, but she's a criminology graduate. I've spoken to her quite a few times. Little bit of a genius, and she's joining us now. So here we go.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
You all right? Yeah,
Yeah.
not too bad. Not too bad. So for the people that have joined so far, this is Nisha, who's a master's graduate and due to start a PhD this year at Oxford University doing criminology and criminal justice. So very clued up in those areas. I was saying, Nisha, I think you're the fourth one that we've done. Bookie, who did one of the lives with us recently as well,
Yeah.
and they've been pretty popular so far. So I'm sure you'll be impressing people. So if we start off, if you can just give us a bit of background into yourself, what's your background and your upbringing been like?
So I was brought up on. Always lived in the same place. I was brought up on a predominantly white working class council estate in Kingston, but Kingston itself's like a really affluent area. So the majority of people around me lived in like rather large houses, and I went to a primary school that had predominantly, I'd say, middle class white people that went to it. So I think I was the only one of two mixed race people in my year in my school, and I don't know how many there were in the whole school, but my sister also went there as well. So yeah, I was around predominantly white people during my childhood, apart from my dad's side of the family.
Okay. And were you obviously, when I introduced you, said what you've achieved so far in education. Were you always quite academic?
Yeah, so I've always been, I don't know if I'd say naturally smart, but I was always like up there in terms of top set and everything. And then when I went on to secondary school, it was the same thing. And in secondary school, I think was the first place that I went that I struggled with that a little bit, because I had a bit of a shift in the people that I was around. So it wasn't, although I still went to a predominantly white secondary school and it was still predominantly middle class, I was around a bit more of a diverse population. And so I started hanging on with, majority of my friends would be like getting in trouble, getting excluded. And so I was kind of in a sort of like, it was difficult to remain focused at secondary school in comparison to primary school, put it that way. But I always managed to stay focused. And I did face like certain things where people would make comments like, "Oh, you're unique. You're always doing your work." But for me, it was always what I was passionate about. So like, I always knew that I wanted to have an academic career path, and so I just never really let that interfere with what I wanted, which was difficult at times.
And what was it that made you choose to move on to do criminology and focus on that and criminal justice?
Yeah, so I've always been really like, I've always questioned things a lot. So, for example, when I was younger, my parents I'd watch the news with my parents, and they'd make comments, and I'd be like, I'd question what they're listening to, rather than just absorb it. And I've always found myself doing that. And then when I got to A levels, I chose the option of sociology, and I was like, I remember so clearly doing a lesson on Marxism and crime and deviance, and I was like, wow, like there's people out here that actually think like me, because I've always been really critical like of the system, of everything. And when I did sociology, I was like, wow, it's actually a discipline, like people actually study this. And from then I knew straight away. I was like, yeah, this is it for me. Like social class injustices, it was like, it's not just me that cares about these things. So yeah, from then I knew. And I've also had like my own experiences sort of through other people that are close to me more so. So I've had like, particularly my dad, he's always spoken a lot about how he was treated in the 80s by police and the justice system. And so I've always been aware of racial injustice in particular. And that was also what drove me. And I then, when I went to, I went to university to study criminology after doing my A-levels. And then I had someone really close to me go to prison for a long time. And so even more so then, I was like, I just need to carry on doing this. And that was for a conviction based on joint enterprise. I don't know if people know what that is, but it's basically a joint liability doctrine that you can basically get a life sentence for the crime that's of somebody else, simply because you're associated with them or have been involved in some way. And the injustice that I saw there just pushed me even more. And I started to see the impact that the criminal justice system has on people who are innocent and people who are completely have nothing to do with crime, including the family members of prisoners, and how difficult that is for them. And so these are populations as well that are just never spoken about. And so for me, it was like, it's really important to give these people a voice, because they've never been given one. And even now they're not given one. And the suffering that they endure, particularly prison particularly impacts mothers, Black and minority ethnic mothers, and their voices are not given a platform. And so I just basically want to carry on doing research that gives voices to populations of people who've been oppressed or never had the opportunity to speak up.
So can you give us some examples of how, because I think in general the public are aware, yeah, prison must not be a nice place for someone who's committed an offence. But like you said, I think people don't generally think about the families and close friends and relatives of the people who've gone into prison. So do you want to give us a bit of a breakdown into how they can be affected?
Yeah, so I'll start with my first thesis, my first dissertation project, which I interviewed 6 prisoners' partners. They weren't current, but some of them were current and some of them were previously prisoners' partners, so they'd experienced it previously. And they were in-depth interviews. And the main thing that I got from those was that there's a massive, they live 2 lives, and it almost takes over their lives, because they're torn between the stigma of associating themselves with a person who's got this stigma from the public, and it being someone that they love. And the key thing is that it can happen to anyone. You've also got the financial cost of prison. The prisons are not usually close to your home, so you've got people who really struggle with that. And there's not that much help out there. There is help out there, but there's not that much help out there for the families of prisoners. And so many things, like people are stuck with the decision as to whether to, particularly the partners of prisoners, as to how to manage taking their children to a prison, how to explain that to their children, how to maintain a relationship between the child and the parent. It's a difficult thing, and it's a very it's quite burdensome. Like, I've experienced it myself. So going to a prison to visit someone, you feel like you are, in a sense, secondarily prisonized, because you're going there, you are being surveilled, you're being searched, you are suspected of a crime as soon as you enter that prison. That's how it feels. And so you kind of take on what that person has done as a family member.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for me, when I go into the prisons, it's you feel judged as well. No matter what, it's like you're feeling judged by the prison officers. And for people who haven't been to go on prison visits, I mean, it's not the easiest process in the world, depending on which prison it is. It's not like you just rock up and you go and sit down and meet whoever it is you're meeting. It's generally quite a long, slow process where it can feel quite degrading as well.
Yeah, definitely. That's like, and it's also another thing of like the feeling of guilt as well. Particularly mums get this a lot, which is just takes a massive toll on mothers, like feeling guilty for one not preventing their child from being there somehow, even though it's not their fault, and two, from not being able to do anything to help them now they're in there. And joint enterprise is probably one of the worst, because they are literally to try and get over the fact that your son, your brother, your nephew has been convicted of something they didn't actually do themselves is just devastating. And you've got, it's just a constant struggle of a fight for justice for those people. And you automatically get shut down simply because of the stigma behind being in prison. People are like, well, he must be a horrible person. He must be guilty. He's there. People don't believe in an injustice until it's proven, and that's the problem.
Yeah, no, exactly. And with something like you say, with something like joint enterprise, I mean, I've had people that I've been to go and visit who've been given very long-term sentences for crimes like murder, for being involved through joint enterprise, but the person who actually has committed the murder, physically committed it, hasn't been convicted. And
Exactly.
so it's, again, the sense of injustice there is just by association, by being there. And I mean, being topical and looking at stuff that's going on with the George Floyd case at the moment. I mean, people are saying around the other 3 police officers that were there being done for joint enterprise, and actually they've been arrested and charged, but they've not been charged with murder. So they haven't really been charged with joint enterprise in the way that your average person would be.
Yeah, that was I've been saying from the beginning. If that was 4 boys, they'd all been charged with murder from day one. And joint enterprise predominantly impacts black boys simply because of the gang narrative that's been heavily racialized, and so the police over classify black youth as gang members, and so they're really susceptible to the use of joint enterprise in prosecution, which is another element of criminal justice where the black population are disproportionately affected.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, I'll be keen to come back in a bit to talk about how black people are stereotyped by the police, society, and the justice system. Before we do, just because we're talking about prisons at the moment, I'm keen to get your views on the benefits of prison to society and how useful they are. I mean, I was looking into it recently, and I think it's about 70% of children that are released from custody in 2018 went on to reoffend within a year, which to me suggests that actually, if prison's there to protect the public and to stop people from offending, then a 70% reoffending rate shows it's not very good at doing what it's supposed to be doing. So I struggle to see why we're investing so much money into it.
Yeah, so you've got the aims of prisons: public protection, deterrence, and rehabilitation, and prison doesn't do any of them. The only thing prison really does, which is also one of its aims, is to sort of offer a sense of public denunciation, like we denounce what you did. But there's ways to do that without the prison. And for me, it clearly doesn't deter, because the rates of reoffending are so high. And it also doesn't have, it's not a therapeutic place. It's not a therapeutic place at all. You can't provide therapy in a prison. You can't provide a sense of rehabilitation in a prison, in the prisons we have in the UK anyway, and most places across the globe. I think some Nordic countries are a bit of an exception. But for me personally, the environment in which you're receiving therapy is the most important thing. I don't know if you've heard of Grendon Prison.
Of what?
Grendon
Prison.
Sorry,
no, I don't think so.
It's basically a prison, but it's known as a therapeutic community. And I think there's still issues with this, but they have it's not your average prison. They have like a system where you can sort of, the prisoners vote and have like a president, and they talk about their crimes often, and they basically have therapy there, and the reoffending rates there are a little bit lower, not massively, but a little bit. And I think if we are to keep prisons, we need to move towards that. Not exactly that, but towards that. The other problem with that is simply that you can't go there unless you say, yeah, I did my crime, because you've got to talk about it. And so there's another issue there, is that people are in prison that are confessing innocence. So yeah, the key thing for me is that prison itself is, the main reason people think we need it is for public protection, when the majority of people in prison are not violent offenders. So then you have to ask yourself, can we deal with these people in the community? And the answer is most certainly yes. Drug offences can be dealt with in the community. They're not a threat to the public. And of course, the illicit drugs trade can catalyse violence in some circumstances. But if we stop criminalising, the thing people need to understand is that crime itself is a social construct. We decide what's criminal. The more we make illegal, the more people go to prison, and the more violence is likely to come of an act, because it's now criminal. It's now done illegally. So yeah, when you actually break down who's in prison as well, the majority of people in prison have been victims themselves of a lot of them have been in social care, experienced extreme poverty. We need to address those health issues prior to thinking about prison, because if we address those health issues, these people are less likely to end up in a situation where they are going to prison anyway. And for me, that's why I believe that we should massively reduce the prison population and invest in public health.
Well, it's a classic case of dealing with the consequence rather than dealing with the cause, isn't it? There's a cause for a lot of these people, like you're saying, being involved in social care, substance misuse, mental health issues, and actually those are the issues that we need to be looking at and dealing with, not just picking them up, putting them into a prison where it's even less likely that those issues are going to get dealt with, and then expecting them to come out and be a completely turned around and reformed character. Also expecting them to come out and not to feel a sense of hatred and just despising the society and the justice system because of the injustice that they feel they felt.
Yeah, I think it's also really important to remember women as well. They're obviously don't make up that much of the prison population, but in terms of the mental health issues in women's prisons is massive. And women in research that I've read into, women actually say that prison has saved them from such massive harms on the outside. And that just says a lot about our society. We don't do anything about so something like domestic violence, for example. They've said prison saved me from being killed by my partner, but why is prison meant to be the thing that's saving them? We should be saving them in the community, doing things to prevent these things from happening in the first place. So yeah, it's just really sad when you put it like that.
And on that topic, a majority of prisoners in the UK have either witnessed or experienced domestic abuse in their lifetime as well, whether it's been towards them or whether it's been in involving with their parents. Yeah. So again, I think I personally think domestic abuse is one of the biggest factors in the UK for crime and loads of other issues. And again, it's, as you say, it's not really been dealt with properly, and it's not, the people haven't been offered the right sort of support. And that's both perpetrators and victims. And I think you said something earlier, which I really agree with, which is that most of the people who are convicted in prison are people who've been victims themselves. And I'm yet to work with someone who's committed an offence that has not been a victim in some way or form.
Yeah. So you start to see how the notion of offender and victim conflate, and they're not separable in most cases.
Well, someone was talking to me about this the other day, actually, and they were relating it to illegal drugs. And they were saying that people who take illegal drugs, so for example, someone who smokes cannabis, which is illegal in this country, then they can be arrested, they can get a conviction, eventually they could go to custody. Someone who's selling it and making a profit from it could get exactly the same but worse. However, when you look at the two substances that we've got in society that cause the most harm and the most damage, which is cigarettes and alcohol, if you smoke and you drink, it's fine. And if you sell it and make a huge profit from it, which the government do through the taxes, then that's fine as well. And again, that I think kind of highlights your point about it being a social construct.
and also a social construct centered around race again, because you think about cannabis and what it was associated with when people started to worry about it in the UK, is associated with black Jamaican men, and then you wonder why they've come down so harshly on cannabis, and why the police now in the UK spend so much of their time just simply stopping young boys for smoking cannabis. That is a lot of police time is spent doing that, and a lot of that is not harming anyone. So yeah, we also need to think about resources and how better we can actually use our criminal justice system that we have.
Well, like I say, with the whole George Floyd incident and the Black Lives Matter movements, I think it's starting to come out a bit more around the sort of structural racism that's involved in our system. And I was talking to some of our team of mentors about it last week, and one of them brought up the fact that they've got a young man they're looking after who's 18, who's started to turn his life around and is doing quite well for himself. And he was out and stopped for no apparent reason and searched, and they found half a spliff on him, and he was then arrested and taken to the police station. And for me, my thoughts are, firstly, if that was a middle-class university student who was white, would he have been stopped and searched in the first place? And then even if he was stopped and searched, would he have been arrested and taken down to the police station and charged, or would it have just been confiscated off of him and he's told he shouldn't be doing that? And I think that, again, kind of highlights the inequalities.
Yeah, and the statistics as well are so biased simply because where policing is situated. So, for example, I don't see, I go to Oxford University, and I know that people take drugs there a lot, the undergraduates a lot, predominantly white people, and there's no police on campus, there's no police centered around there. So arrests are likely going to disproportionately affect black people, and they're going to be overrepresented amongst the statistics for those who get arrested for things like drug use or possession. And so, yeah, it's a difficult one. Yeah.
And so, what do you have any views or opinions on what society can do in order to try and change things and reduce that sort of structural racism? Not an easy question, but
yeah. Me personally, what I'm trying to do is spread the knowledge that I have, because I see a lot of people struggle to speak up because they don't know how to. They think, oh, I don't know how to articulate myself. If somebody comes back at me with something, I don't know what to say. So I think it's really important just to actually know your history, even basic history, Black history, and just know facts that you can come back at people with when they come back with comments that I've had a lot on Instagram recently. I know that some people would struggle to come back because they're like, oh no, I don't know if what I'm saying is facts. So I personally would love to sort of normalize things like going to the library and talking about Black history, and not just Black history, history that affects everybody. And it's such a small thing in terms of, like, it's not going to make a huge difference, me spreading my knowledge, but if everybody starts talking and starts listening to each other rather than speaking just from a place of anger, I think that's where we can start, and that's where we can start to come together and actually address the issue. I think people need to start getting involved in political movements as well, start lobbying local politicians and hounding them with requests. It's your right to do so. And I think for me, we live in a country where crime is heavily politicized. So politicians use crime to their advantage to get votes. They position crime as something that is the ultimate threat to everybody. And then they position issues of race amongst that as well. So that things like migration and diversity seem to be a threat to people, when in fact that's not the truth. And so for me personally, as a criminologist, my intention is to try to bring true criminological knowledge to the public, so they know the reality of crime, what's actually happening on the ground, and who is actually responsible for what, rather than just simply allowing politicians to to say, this is a threat to you, so we need 20,000 new police officers. Why do we need 20,000 new police officers? They should have to explain themselves and show what exactly those 20,000 new police officers are needed for and what they're going to do. And I think I was speaking to you about this recently, about youth crime and the public health approach they're bringing in. The public health approach has is a fantastic ideology and a fantastic paradigm, because it seeks to address the root causes and actually prevent things like going to prison, and it seeks to address the long term the issue in the long term. But the government that we have are still politicizing this and still focusing on this gang narrative and criminalizing drill music, when these are not the root causes of the issue. They're still talking about, let's introduce enhanced stop and search powers and in 20,000 new officers and tougher sentences. How can you be talking about a public health approach that seeks to address root causes when you're talking about making the country more punitive and harsh? It just doesn't make sense. So for me personally, the first step is getting rid of a Conservative government. But yeah, that's the first step for me personally.
I think the whole political system though needs to be reviewed, because in my experience, it's the political cycles are so short, with 4 or 5 years, that politicians are only ever looking at what's going to be the short-term outcomes rather than looking at the long-term outcomes. And the public health, a proper public health approach, is going to take a number of years before you see the benefits from it. And so I think if you're a Conservative politician, you'd be worried, actually, if we're going to be focused on this, is the benefit going to be seen when Labour's in power? And so I think that's what needs to change as well. There needs to be more cross-party sort of processes that they're doing for these sort of things, because it's just ridiculous. And I mean, a recent example of how politicians getting involved in the law is just nonsense is with the recent terror attack. I can't remember the guy's name who was killed with the
Saskia and Jack Merritt, sorry.
Jack Merritt, that's the one, yeah. So with this guy who attacked them, and now the politicians coming in saying, oh, okay, well, we need to stop people from why was he released from prison only halfway through? Yeah. Well, because he was supposed to be, because that's the law, because it's part served in the community and part served in custody. And then they come and then they're trying to put more stringent rules in there, where the reality is what they're doing is they're going to create more crime and more criminals and reduce rehabilitation, because they're wanting to keep people in the places that keep them offending, prisons, for even longer. And the irony is that Jack himself was really anti-prisons and was pro-community sentences, and yet the politicians are coming in. And I heard his dad complaining about it, and he was basically given loads of abuse on Twitter for him and his son's views, which are that actually, this was a terrible thing that happens, but putting people in prison for longer is not going to stop it. Of course, he didn't want to see anyone else's son going through this, so he was passionate in saying that actually, in order to prevent these things from happening, we need more community sentences, we need more community support, and we need to look more at the causes. We don't need to just lock them up and throw away the key, because that's not going to help anyone.
Yeah, and that's the problem in this country and in America in particular. There's reactive political responses. If something happens, they react. We need to do this straight away. Why are you not studying it? Why are you not actually looking into how that's going to have an impact? You just respond to public outcry without actually talking to the public and speaking to them, bringing people who actually know what they're talking about to talk to the public, basically, is what they
educating
don't do.
The public.
Yeah, exactly. And so they just react, and that's how harsh policies are always implemented. If you look back, the majority of the time, because you get public outcry, of course, which is going to happen when something so devastating happens. But the problem is that politicians just react by saying, okay, we need to change this, bring in more harsh legislation, and then the actual problem doesn't go anywhere. So yeah, I completely agree with you.
I've heard you talking as well about black on black crime, and that term being used as a definition. What can you give us your opinion on that?
I really don't like the terminology, because violence, and youth violence in particular, is not a black issue. It's a highly economic one. When you look at the people who are most likely to experience violence, and they're amongst the poorer sections of society. And yeah, there is a massive intersection between poverty and race. So yeah, a lot of Black youth are susceptible to this. But if you just have to look at somewhere like Scotland, for example, Glasgow, who was at one point the knife crime capital in Europe, predominantly white. It's an economic issue. It's those who are in the poorest neighbourhoods, and so it's an issue of it's an issue that is from stems back to the ongoing oppression and marginalisation of Black people. It's not an issue that they created for themselves. So yeah, we need radical change that addresses systemic poverty and marginalisation. And when people are coming back at me when I'm talking about the George Floyd situation, and talking against white supremacy, and they say, oh, but Black people don't care when they're killing each other. For me, the Black Lives Matter movement is about that as well. So it's about all violence that affects the Black community, simply because all the violence that affects the Black community can be rooted in their ongoing oppression. The reasons why they live in these poor neighborhoods can be linked back to their ongoing oppression if you study your history. And the distribution of wealth in our country and in America is so unequal, and that's where the issue lies. And that's what people fail to understand, because it is quite a complex issue, and I do get why people do say these things. And it's a lot of Black people themselves that do say this, so they're like frustrated when they don't see the same amount of outcry when a Black young guy kills another Black guy, compared to when a policeman does so. But for me, Black Lives Matter isn't just about police brutality. It's about all the social harms that Black people experience that can be rooted in their ongoing oppression that's been happening for hundreds of years.
And that's coming from slavery times, and from
exactly
when apparently once slavery's been made illegal, that's solved all of the issues. But really, it hasn't, because if they have preventing slavery, that's not created a society where we have Black people equal to white people at all. Because slavery has just slightly improved the situation on a very small
small level. Like I did a video on this yesterday. So it's simple when you break it down. So literally, you get rid of a system of slavery, but you don't get rid of the ideology surrounding race, what race means, that these people are subordinate. So that ideology travels, it then travels into segregation laws. Segregation laws are abolished, but the ideology that these Black people are subordinate still stays there. And then you form the idea that these people are criminal and barbaric and crazy. All these ideas remain beyond the dismantling of slavery and Jim Crow. And so you end up with a system that continues to oppress. And the problem now is that this system appears to be colorblind, because you get all different races caught up in the system, and some Black people manage to prosper. But laws predominantly, the law predominantly affects Black people in the UK and USA. So as you know, things like stop and search, the gangs matrix, gang injunctions, they all predominantly affect Black communities to this day, and they always have. And to deny that is simply to deny facts.
So you've spoken about the gang matrix. I'd be interested to hear your opinion on that. For people that don't know, the gang matrix was a list of people that the police defined as being involved in gangs. It wasn't necessarily based on evidence, but on intelligence. And intelligence can be very flaky, hence why intelligence can't be used in a court of law. It has to be evidence. But yeah, what's your opinion on creating this gangs matrix list?
Well, I think it's one of the worst things that was invented. But what it simply does is, because the gang narrative is heavily associated with black young men, police biases are simply formalized by putting them onto this database, so they appear to be intelligence. So the police basically decide who they think is a gang member via maybe association, or if they've been involved in an offence that they deemed to be gang related. And that's why the statistics for 2019 are shocking. I think the number of young black men on it was about 2,000 something, and no other race even reaches 500, I don't think. It's shocking. So these people are then subject to enhanced surveillance. They have an excuse to stop and search this person. Oh, they're on the gang matrix. If they ever caught with somebody who commits a crime, they're automatically susceptible to being targeted under joint enterprise as well. You're on the gangs matrix. Straight away, that's going to be used against them. And it's just a really dangerous tool because people are on it. There are people on it that definitely aren't gang members, and the police are actually forced to remove people recently, you know, this as well, simply because there is no proof that they are gang members. You're on a system that you're being told you are something criminal without being convicted in a court of law. So what happened to innocent until proven guilty? It's literally just completely goes against due process.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're, say, someone who's on the gang matrix, who's been sent to prison, and they come out and their license conditions are that they're not allowed to associate with other gang members, for me, that's something I have a real issue with, because firstly, if they've not been convicted of being a gang member, which they haven't been, and you can't be, then why are they not allowed to associate with other gang members? Secondly, who are the other gang members? Whose definition is it of what another gang member is? And so you could be releasing someone, and the police believe their brother's a gang member as well. So he's then associating with that gang member, and you're just criminalising what is generally normal behaviour for these people. And it's you have no real chance. And it's the scary thing is I've heard that the only way of getting off the gangs matrix is if you get sent to prison, and that's not for a society that believes in rehabilitation and the ability for people to change. Why would it be stated that you can only come off if you've been arrested? Surely, if you are going to have the gangs matrix, there should still be the belief that people are able to change. But before that even happens, it's got to be that what is the definition of this gang, and how have you decided that you're going to put people on it? Because my definition, the police's definition, your definition, and the people I know's definitions are all, I'm sure, very, very different, and it's a very sort of subjective thing to define. So
there's no agreed upon definition across the globe. So that's amongst academia. Academics have like debates about this all the time. So there's some academics that are like, yeah, the gangs crisis is crazy. All youth crime should be is put down to gang violence. And then other academics are like, hold on a minute, you don't even know what a gang is. The concepts that academics and police use, like joining a gang, aren't even used by young people themselves. You don't join a gang, you don't sign a contract. Gangs are fluid things. They're complex things that you can't define. So why are we putting it in the hands of police to decide what a gang is when they don't even know what a gang? They never experienced it themselves. So that's a major problem. You're defining people as something that is almost impossible to define, because gangs change according to location, according to who's involved in them. Like you've got gangs associated with drugs, gangs not associated with drugs. How do you define a gang? How do you and the definition that the Home Office has put out there is so broad, right, that me and my friends, by that definition, it's something along the lines of has to consist of 3 or more people, have a defining characteristic that makes you kind of be able to be associated with one another. For God's sake, 3 of my friends could have the same tattoo and we'd fall into that category, but we'd never get put on that matrix. Why? Because I'm a woman. So it's just literally that definition is so broad, so they can catch whoever they want in that system, and they are predominantly black boys that they put on these matrices.
I think the other part of that definition is that they have to have some sort of financial gain from being a part of that gang as well. And I think quite arguably you could say, well, hold on, the police are paid, the police all have the same interest, the police all dress uniformed in the same way, and therefore, as a number of people are commenting as we're going through this, the police are the biggest gang out there.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, exactly. And police culture is one of the most dangerous things, because police will protect one another till the end. So even when they do something wrong, it's part of police culture to protect one another. And this is me talking from talking to ex-police officers and police officers themselves. So yeah, it's a dangerous thing. And simply because they have power and they have that uniform, they would never be defined as such by the government. But yeah.
And this is what I think leads to a lack of trust in the police, and a lack of trust from the police, and a lack of trust in the justice system. And I think because of that lack of trust, that therefore leads to further crime, because people, if someone's offended against, if they don't feel that they're going to get a fair hearing and they're going to get the issue resolved by going to the police, then they're going to look at trying to deal with it themselves. And in dealing with themselves, that could then result in them being arrested. And so you get this vicious cycle.
What for me, what the community police relations, particularly amongst the Black community, again, are so poor, simply because when you think about a Black child growing up, particularly young boy, even women, because they raise these young men who experience this majority of the time. And when you think about a young, generally poor people, or people living in poverty and neighbourhoods that are heavily policed, what is their first interaction with government? What do they see as government? The police officers, or your mum struggling to get her welfare payments or something else like that. Their interaction with government is highly negative. And so if your first interaction with the state is a police officer stopping and searching you, raiding your home, you are going to refrain from wanting to be part of that society politically as well. And this is why so many Black people don't vote, because they think the system is not for them. So it's really damaging. Like, there's a really good book, I think it's called Arresting Citizenship. It's based on the US context, but it's about the impact that continuous surveillance, stop and search, arrests amongst the Black community, how the impact that has on the choice for them to refrain from being part of the political society. So yeah, and my dad has always said to me, I used to bang on at my dad, why do you not vote? Why do you not vote? And it's the same reasons. Because his first interaction with the state when he came here is police officers chasing him with their batons hidden in newspapers to beat him and his friends. And so to him he thinks, why am I voting in a country that's not democratic in the first place? And so yeah, when you have that experience with the police constantly, it's really hard to build a relationship with any form of government. And that's why you hear a lot of people say F the government, because that's all they experience.
So what do you think can be done about it? Obviously you've spoken about education, but which I agree, I think education is the most important thing, and it has to be the right education as well. I think the education system in the UK, especially when you look at history, I think is very, very biased, and there needs to be a more sort of honest and wider ranging curricula when it comes to history. What else would you see as the answer? And I mean, obviously it's not just one thing, but when I say the answer, I mean with regards to the police system, the justice system, with regards to every form of sort of structural racism that's out there, and also what's the alternatives to prison as well?
Yeah, so personally, I think massive reduction in all criminal justice agencies. So reduce them where necessary by decriminalisation, for example, cannabis. That would reduce the number of police officers continuously stopping and searching people, for starters, but also actually ensuring that people that work in the criminal justice system are educated people who actually have understood understand structural racism. They should have to take some sort of training in understanding this, or some sort of degree in understanding this, because they are a massive contributing factor to the continuous oppression of particular groups, and they are so vital to changing that they shouldn't be able to police until they fully understand it. So I think we do need to take a leaf out of the books of the Nordic countries, because if you look at like Denmark, you've got police there that have all got degrees in like criminology, social care, and these are people that understand that most people that are arrested, prosecuted, or have been victims themselves, and that's the change that needs to be made. And we do need really radical change, and that's what I struggle with, whether that's actually going to happen, simply because we have a society that's really fixated on law and order and like retribution, getting revenge.
I think that's key. Revenge is the key word. I think when you look at prisons and when you look at punishments, I think revenge is more important to a lot of society than rehabilitation.
Yeah, and that's what we need to dismantle. And the only way we will get rid of that is by showing these people that it doesn't work. And it's clear to people like me and you that it doesn't work, right? But to your average person, they are looking at short term. It works for the short term because you feel like you've got justice. But society continues to experience this crime simply because we are not doing anything to stop it in the long term. And yes, it may be difficult for some people to say, let's only give a murderer 6 or 7 years. But in the long term, it will prevent more crimes occurring, because you can look at countries that do so, and they focus on providing them with real opportunities when they do go to prison, when they are sentenced, so they have real opportunities when they come out. And it's like our society doesn't want to do that for these people because there's so much hatred, but when in reality doing so actually provides a better place for your children when they grow up. But yeah, exactly. It's a difficult one.
I mean, when I first got into this sort of field of work, my main job was I was working for an organisation called Youth Advocate Programme over in Lambeth, and it was running the Intense Supervision Surveillance Programme, and that was where, when young people were offending, if they're prolific offenders, just before like sort of the last chance before going into custody, they'd be sentenced to ISS, which is Intense Supervision Surveillance, where they would then be given a worker who'd work with them 25 hours a week, 7 days a week, and for up to a year. And the role of your job was to try and look at all of the causes of why they've gone into offending and try and prevent that. So it's getting them back into education, improving the family home system, sorting out any court cases they've got, educating them around how they can progress and move forward in life. And we saw that work so well. My only criticism of it was that it was a year long, and I thought that was not long enough. I think that if you're going to make lasting change, you have to be able to invest a bit more time in the long term for these people. And people watching this might be thinking, well, hold on, that's expensive. That's why are you going for that option? But I think when you look at what the real cost of prison is compared to this, and the real cost of reoffending, I think having community sentences like that, where people are supported, where they're believed in, and it's truly believed that they can become successful themselves, then that is what will make our society a better place for everyone to live, really, because there will be true rehabilitation.
Yeah, and making people see those opportunities, and like you said, it's so much easier to do that in the community because they can actually see them. In prison, you can be told, "Oh yeah, we're going to help you get this job X, Y, and Z," but you can't see any change happening. So it's all about providing hope as well for people, and that can definitely be done a lot better in the community. I mean, there are massive problems with community sentences as well, because you run the risk of sort of widening the net as to who becomes subject to the criminal justice system. So when they first introduced community sentences, it was posed as like we're going to stop sending as many people to prison. But what happened instead is that people were sent to prison, as well as people for minor offences getting community sentences who would have previously not been sentenced to prison at all or had a community sentence. And then you have community sentence with loads of conditions that what's referred to as thinning the mesh. And so you get caught up in something that you previously wouldn't have got caught up in, because the community sentence itself has all these conditions that you have to meet. Otherwise, you go back to prison. So we need to be careful
Yeah.
with community sentences that aren't too stringent, where you get caught up in a cycle of trying to meet these conditions, but also struggling with that and then ending up back in prison anyway.
Yeah. The constant breaches, which then lead to custody, and also lead to then making people think they're not able to achieve.
Yeah, exactly.
Frustrating to say the least. So one of the other things I wanted to talk to you about as well is the current protests that are going on, and I'd be keen to hear your opinion on the protests, whether you think that they should happen, whether you think they're going to make a difference, or what you think is going to help them make a difference.
So I went today actually for about an hour and a half. I had to get back to do this though. So I think it's really good. I would never say that let's not do that. I think it's amazing. I have been feeling really like conflicted recently about certain things, because I've been doing a few videos on Instagram. I've had some really not very nice comments. And even from people close to me, again, so this is one of the things that I face, because being a mixed race person, I've got a side of my family who are white and a side of my family who are black. And my immediate family, so my mum and dad and sisters and stuff, we all agree, we all have the same views, more or less. But there are people in my family who've made comments such as things like, the situation happened with the horse yesterday. Yeah. So like, oh, look at these violent protesters, now you're hurting horses. And what I'm struggling with is the fact that people are choosing when they want to speak about morality. And for me, it's like, if you want to condemn something, you condemn all violence, right? So I condemn if a protester injures a police officer and a horse for no reason. I also condemn when a police officer injures a protester for no reason, right? That's fair. That's someone who just has morals, right? But you've got people who are purposely mobilizing things that these protesters are doing to defeat their purpose. And it's really frustrating when you are talking about a horse or a police officer being hurt, but you don't talk about the reason these protesters are there, and the damage that's been done. So I've really been struggling with that, actually. So I just think people need to be really honest with themselves and actually ask themselves, am I being biased here? Is there a reason why I only care when violence is inflicted upon certain people and not others? Is there a reason why I'm just finding any excuse to condemn the rioters? They're not rioters in the UK anyway, so there was some violence yesterday, but the majority of the protests have been peaceful. So when you immediately start saying that these people are violent, ask yourself, why are you calling them violent when the majority of protests are peaceful? There is a reason behind that, and it's because you obviously have some sort of prejudice. And I think people just need to be really honest with themselves and actually ask themselves, am I making excuses for people, or am I purposely sort of condemning actions that on one side but not the other? And that's what's really frustrating me. But I do also think that the protests themselves are not necessarily going to bring massive radical change, but what it is doing is spreading awareness, making people have these conversations, making people question themselves and have conversations with their family members, with people. So my friend's actually wanted to do some sort of talk with her work, which she's never done before, just to talk about her experience of racism and systemic racism that's in the UK. And these kind of conversations are really good, and that's what's coming from this movement. Just having conversations with people and potentially changing the minds of some people, which is really good.
Yeah, no, definitely. Right, we've almost finished. We've almost used up our hour. But before you go, I mean, is there any other advice you can think of to give specifically to the young people that are growing up in today's society about what they can do? Obviously, education is a key element. But is there anything else? Any other advice you can give?
God, put me on the spot. Just get involved where you can with charities, people like yourself. I've had some messages actually on my Instagram asking how people can help, and charity is the first place you can help. Do things that, if you don't know what to do, just ask people what you can do. Don't be afraid to ask people what you can do, and there will always be someone out there that can give you an option of something that you can do. But yeah, other than educate yourself, I would say get involved in some charity work, most definitely. Yeah.
I think that's an important point as well. It's asking questions and not being afraid to ask questions. And
Yeah.
if you see something in the news or in the media that says that says something that you're not quite sure about, that don't necessarily believe it. Go and speak to other people and try and find out. And I think us having you on here is a really good example. And it's about getting people like you who've got that education, who've got that information, that knowledge, getting them out there, getting them on a platform where people are able to listen to a different point of view, and people are able to get access to you to ask questions as well. So yeah. I think it's been really good. So yeah, massive thank you from me. I've got a feeling we may well get you on again in the future, because I think you've got a lot to say that could be really useful. We've had loads of comments of people saying how useful this has been today. So yeah, massive thank you for taking your time out to do that. Yeah, sorry if I've babbled on a bit. No, we want you to babble on. It's good. That was the aim. That was the aim. You've done it. So hopefully you've helped educate me. I'm sure you've helped educate all the people that have been watching this as well. And hopefully we'll have some of our participants who've watched this, and also who'll be able to see it when we stick it up on our normal Instagram feed. And hopefully we'll get you down at the club to do some boxing when lockdown's over. Definitely. Brilliant. I just want to say to everyone as well, just go and study a bit of sociology, even if it's like a little module. I mean, it will just open your mind as to different perspectives on life, and you'll realise how everything in life is socially constructed, and why it's constructed that way. But yeah. Definitely. And as I think Kate on here was saying, knowledge is power, and I think that's a key phrase. Knowledge is the most powerful thing you can do. So if people want to make change, make a difference, go and get that knowledge, and then you can make that difference. Yeah. Brilliant. All right. Well, thank you very much, Nisha. Thanks to you too. Really enjoyed that. I'll speak to you soon. Cheers. Bye. Bye.